Have you ever wondered why Prophet Muhammad prohibited the recording of hadiths? It's a question that sparks intrigue, isn't it? The popular narrative suggests that the Prophet Muhammad discouraged the recording of hadiths, his sayings, to avoid them being muddled up with verses from the Quran. But let's pause and ponder over this for a moment. Does this explanation satisfy our intellectual curiosity? The Quran itself asserts its position as the singular authority of Islam. It's a fully detailed book providing explanations for everything. It's very unlikely that Prophet Muhammad, the very conveyor of the Quran's message, was oblivious to this fact. Moreover, if hadiths were indeed an integral part of Islam, isn't it somewhat contradictory that their recording was prohibited by the Prophet himself? Let's think about it. If hadiths were intended to serve as a religious source, wouldn't the Prophet have ensured their systematic documentation to prevent any omission, alteration, or introduction of false sayings? So, if hadiths were indeed an essential part of Islam, wouldn't the Prophet have ensured their organized documentation to prevent any distortion or adulteration? Before we delve deeper into the Quranic Authority, let's explore a verse that emphasizes the Quran as self-explanatory and the only source for Islam. Surah Al-An'am, verse 38 states, "There is not a creature on earth, nor a bird that flies with its wings, but they are communities like you. We have not neglected anything in the book. Then to their Lord they will be gathered." This verse, delivered directly from the Prophet Muhammad, clearly asserts the Quran as a complete guide for Muslims. It states that nothing has been neglected in the Quran, which implies its self-explanatory nature, requiring no external sources for interpretation. Furthermore, it signifies that the Quran is the only source for Islam, negating the need for supplementary texts like hadiths. This verse therefore not only highlights the Quran's self-explanatory nature, but also asserts its position as the only source for Islam. It's a clue that further strengthens our curiosity from scene one and perfectly sets the stage for our exploration of the Quranic Authority in the next scene. Now let's turn our attention to the Quran, the holy book of Islam. There is a verse that particularly stands out when we talk about the authority of the Quran. Surah Al-An'am, verse 19 states, "Say, what thing is greatest in testimony? Say, God is witness between me and you, and this Quran was revealed to me that I may warn you thereby and whomever it reaches. Do you testify that with God there are other deities? Say, I will not testify. Say, indeed he is but one God, and indeed I am free of what you associate." This verse, delivered directly from the Prophet Muhammad, clearly establishes the Quran's position as the singular authority in Islam. It communicates that the Quran is not just a book of guidance, but a divine testimony, a testimony that is greater than any human testimony, including the Prophet's own sayings. This verse also emphasizes the oneness of God and the Prophet's disassociation from any form of polytheism, which includes the association of his own words with the divine words of God in the Quran. Therefore, this verse clearly shows the Quran's position as the sole authority in Islam. To truly grasp the reasons behind the prohibition, we need to delve deeper into the matter. The Prophet Muhammad, as we know, was a man of profound wisdom and foresight. He understood that his words, his sayings, if not handled with care, could potentially become a source of idolization and distortion. This could lead to the creation of pseudo-religions and sectarian divisions, fracturing the unity of the Islamic community. Imagine, if you will, a game of telephone. A message starts at one end, and as it passes from person to person, it changes, it morphs, it becomes something entirely different. The Prophet was aware that the same could happen with his sayings if they were recorded and passed down without strict control. He wished to protect the integrity of Islam, to keep it purely based on the teachings of the Quran, the divine word of God. He understood the value of his own words, but he also recognized the potential danger if they were to be considered on par with the Quran. He foresaw the risk of his sayings being used to justify actions and beliefs that are not in line with the teachings of the Quran. With this perspective, one can see that the prohibition of recording hadiths might not have been an act of restricting knowledge, but rather a protective measure. A safeguard, if you will, against the rise of false sayings and the introduction of non-Quranic elements into the religion. Moving forward, we turn our attention to a powerful affirmation of the Quran's sole authority. God, in his infinite wisdom, has built in a safeguard, a fail-safe, if you will, to ensure that the teachings of Islam remain pure and unadulterated. The Quran, in verses 69, 40 to 69, 47, lays out this divine safeguard in a clear and unequivocal manner. This Quran is the utterance of an honorable messenger, not the utterance of a poet. Rarely do you believe, nor the utterance of a soothsayer. Rarely do you take heed. A revelation from the Lord of the universe. Had he uttered any other teachings, we would have punished him. We would have stopped the revelations to him. None of you could have helped him. These verses show us that if the Prophet Muhammad had brought forward any teachings other than the Quran, whether deliberately or under pressure from others, God would have stopped the revelations to him, ended his life on earth, and doubled the retribution for him in the hereafter. This shows us that God himself has taken the responsibility of protecting the purity of his divine message, ensuring that it remains free from any human influence or distortion. This divine safeguard reinforces the idea that the prohibition of recording hadiths was not a restriction on knowledge, but a protective measure to prevent the distortion of the divine message. Let's delve into the Quranic verse that further supports our second point. In Surah Al-Hujurat, verse 2, it is stated, "O you who have believed, do not raise your voices above the voice of the Prophet, or be loud to him in speech like the loudness of some of you to others, lest your deeds become worthless while you perceive not." This verse highlights the respect and reverence the Prophet commanded among his followers. He was not just another man among them, but their spiritual guide and leader. His words carried weight and authority. By raising their voices above his or speaking to him loudly, the followers risked disrespecting the Prophet and diminishing the value of their deeds. This verse, in essence, underscores the potential for the Prophet's words to be idolized and distorted. It emphasizes the importance of maintaining a respectful distance, of not allowing personal interpretations or loud voices to drown out the Prophet's teachings. The verse shows us the potential danger of the Prophet's words being misinterpreted or misused, leading to the creation of pseudo-religions and sectarian divisions, just as we discussed earlier. This verse clearly shows the Prophet's concern about his words being idolized and distorted. Before we unveil the next verse, let's explore yet another Quranic verse that lends further weight to our discussion. This verse from Surah Al-Baqarah emphasizes the importance of following the Quran as the ultimate guide in Islam. It warns against the dangers of deviating from its teachings and creating divisions within the Muslim community. The verse reads, "And hold firmly to the rope of Allah altogether and do not become divided." This metaphor of the rope of Allah is often interpreted as the Quran itself, a divine lifeline extended to humankind. By holding onto this rope, Muslims are expected to remain united in their beliefs, their practices, and their understanding of the faith. Any deviation from the Quran, any attempt to supplement its teachings with external sources, or any divisions based on personal interpretations of the Prophet's words could therefore be seen as a move away from this divine lifeline. This verse thus not only emphasizes the Quran's status as the ultimate guide in Islam, but also warns against the potential risks of deviating from its teachings and creating divisions within the Muslim community. It provides further support to our discussion on the potential reasons behind the Prophet's prohibition of recording hadiths. In light of our previous discussion, let's delve into yet another significant Quranic verse that reasserts the Quran's position as the sole authority in Islam. This verse from Surah Al-Imran cautions against the potential misuse of the Prophet's words and the creation of pseudo-religions. It reads, "And obey Allah and the Messenger, that you may obtain mercy." Here, the verse emphasizes the importance of obeying both Allah and His Messenger. However, it's crucial to note that the verse does not call for the obedience of the Prophet's personal interpretations or supplementary teachings, but rather his role as the conveyor of Allah's message, the Quran. This verse reiterates the Quran's authority, warning against the creation of pseudo-religions based on personal interpretations or misused teachings. It is another piece of the puzzle that leads us to understand why Prophet Muhammad may have prohibited the recording of hadiths. This verse, therefore, not only reaffirms the Quran's position as the sole authority in Islam, but also cautions against the potential misuse of the Prophet's words and the creation of pseudo-religions. It further enhances our understanding of the reasons behind the Prophet's prohibition of recording hadiths. Finally, let's delve into a Quranic verse that lends credence to our third point. The verse in question is Surah Al-Hijr, verse 9, which reads, "Indeed it is we who sent down the Quran, and indeed we will be its guardian." This verse was revealed to Prophet Muhammad and is a clear indication of God's promise to safeguard the Quran from any form of corruption or distortion. It is noteworthy that this divine promise of preservation only applies to the Quran and not to any other Islamic texts, including hadiths. Now, if we take a moment to ponder on this verse, we can see how it supports the theory that Prophet Muhammad's prohibition of recording hadiths was indeed a protective measure. The Prophet, being the recipient of this divine revelation, would have known that the Quran was the only text guaranteed protection by God. Thus, prohibiting the recording of his sayings could have been an effort to prevent any potential misuse or distortion. This verse, therefore, not only highlights the sanctity and inviolability of the Quran, but also underscores Prophet Muhammad's foresight and wisdom in safeguarding the integrity of Islam. As we draw our exploration to a close, let's take a moment to reflect on what we've learned about Prophet Muhammad's prohibition of recording hadiths. Our journey began with questioning the prohibition, seeking understanding from Quranic Authority, and delving deeper into the implications of this prohibition. We've discovered that the common belief is that the prohibition was to avoid confusion with Quranic verses. However, it contradicts the notion of prohibiting something so vital to the essence of Islam. We've also explored an alternative theory suggesting that the prohibition was a protective measure against the potential idolization and distortion of the Prophet's sayings. This theory gains weight when we consider the Quranic verse from Surah Al-Hijr, which guarantees divine protection for the Quran alone, thus implying that other Islamic texts, such as hadiths, could be susceptible to manipulation or misinterpretation. Isn't it fascinating how a single prohibition by Prophet Muhammad could have such profound implications for the preservation of Islam? It's a testament to the complexity and depth of Islamic teachings and a reminder of the thoughtful scrutiny required when interpreting these teachings. As we continue our exploration of Islamic history and teachings, we encourage you to join us with an open mind, ready to question, learn, and understand.